He wasn't supposed to survive, but the tag around his neck belonged to a dead Marine. The road stretched quiet under a fading Carolina dusk, the kind of evening where the sky turned a tired shade of amber and the air carried the faint scent of warm asphalt and distant pine, and Sergeant Ethan Walker drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely by the window, his thoughts somewhere far from the highway ahead, somewhere buried in years he didn't talk about anymore, years that still lived in the silence between breaths. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dimming light, sweeping over cracked lines and scattered gravel, until something small appeared at the edge of that beam, barely more than a shadow at first, a shape that didn't belong to the rhythm of the road, and Ethan almost missed it. Almost. Then it moved. Not a run, not even a crawl, just a faint shift like something trying not to disappear. His foot hit the brake before his mind caught up, tires whispering against the pavement as the truck slowed hard, the engine humming low, steady, uncertain. There, in the middle of the lane, lay a German Shepherd puppy, too still for comfort, too small for the world it had been left in, its fur dusted with dirt, its sides barely rising with shallow breaths that seemed to come from somewhere far away, somewhere fragile. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. The world narrowed. The sound of his own heartbeat filled the cab, heavy and slow, like boots on distant ground. Then a pair of headlights appeared behind him, growing fast, too fast, and instinct snapped him back. He threw the door open and stepped into the road, one hand raised, the other already reaching down, boots hitting pavement with purpose, with something close to urgency he hadn't felt in years. The puppy didn't flinch. It didn't cry. Its eyes, half open, caught the light for just a second, and in that flicker there was no fear, no panic, only a quiet stillness that didn't belong to something so young. Ethan scooped it up gently, feeling how light it was, how wrong that weight felt in his hands, like holding something that hadn't decided if it was staying or leaving. "Hey, stay with me," he muttered, voice low, rough around the edges, the kind of voice that carried more history than words. The truck behind him slowed, then passed, the driver glancing but not stopping, the moment already gone for them, just another blur on a long road. But not for Ethan. Not anymore. He carried the puppy to the shoulder, kneeling down, the gravel pressing through his jeans, the air cooling as the sun dipped lower, and that's when he saw it. A thin strip of worn metal, barely visible beneath the pup's collar, catching the last thread of daylight. A dog. Old. Scratched. Familiar in a way that made his chest tighten before his mind understood why. His fingers hesitated, hovering just above it, as if touching it might confirm something he wasn't ready to face, something that had been buried for years, left behind in places no one ever wanted to return to. The puppy's breath hitched softly against his palm, a fragile reminder of the present, but the past was already rising, slow and certain, carried on the weight of that single, impossible detail. The metal felt colder than it should have, even in the fading warmth of the evening, and Ethan's fingers closed around it with a hesitation that did not belong to a man trained to act without doubt, because something in him already knew before he turned it over, before the faint engraving caught what little light remained. The puppy stirred weakly in his other hand, a soft, uneven breath brushing against his wrist, but Ethan's focus had narrowed to that single object, the edges worn smooth by time, by years of movement, by a life that had once carried it through places far harsher than this quiet stretch of road. He tilted it slightly, just enough for the letters to surface from shadow, and his breath stopped, not sharply, not dramatically, but in that quiet way a man forgets how to inhale when something impossible stands in front of him. Lucas Bennett. The name did not echo. It did not need to. It settled heavy, immediate, like a memory that had never truly left, only been pushed into silence. Ethan's thumb traced the indentation of the letters, slow, deliberate, as if confirming they were real, as if they might shift into something else if he looked away too soon. But they did not change. They stayed exactly as he remembered them, exactly as they had been the last. Tommy saw that tag resting against a uniform that would never be worn again. A breeze moved across the open road, carrying with it the faint scent of dry grass and distant water, brushing against his face like a whisper from somewhere behind him. And for a second, just a second, Ethan was not on that roadside anymore. He was somewhere louder, somewhere heavier, where the air had felt thicker and every second carried weight, where a voice had once called his name with a steady confidence that never wavered, even when everything else did. He blinked, and the road returned, quiet and empty, the sky now deepening into blue, the first stars threatening to appear. The puppy shifted again, a faint tremor running through its small body, pulling Ethan back into the present, into something fragile that still needed him. "Stay with me," he said again, softer this time, not just to the dog, but to something else he could not quite name. He set the tag down gently against the pup's fur, but it did not feel like letting go. It felt like setting down a question that refused to be answered. The engine of his truck ticked quietly behind him as it cooled, the sound steady, grounding, but his thoughts were anything but. He glanced down at the puppy's face, at the way its eyes remained half open, unfocused, yet strangely calm, and there was something there, something that pressed against the edge of recognition, something that did not belong to chance. His jaw tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of something unfinished, something that had followed him farther than he had ever admitted. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself, and without another moment of hesitation, he lifted the puppy closer to his chest, feeling the faint rhythm of its breathing, fragile but present, and turned toward the truck. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he moved, each step measured, deliberate, as if the road itself had shifted beneath him, no longer just a path home, but the beginning of something he had not been looking for, something that had found him instead. And as he opened the passenger door and settled the puppy gently onto the seat, the small metal tag caught the last sliver of daylight once more, glinting briefly, like a signal, like a memory refusing to stay buried. The engine turned over with a low, steady rumble, filling the silence that had settled too heavily around him, and Ethan slid into the driver's seat without taking his eyes off the small figure beside him, as if looking away might cause it to vanish, as if this fragile moment existed on the edge of something he could not yet understand. The puppy lay curled against the worn fabric of the seat, its breathing shallow but present, each rise and fall faint enough that he found himself watching closely, counting without realizing it, measuring life in quiet seconds. He reached over and adjusted the air vents, letting a soft stream of warm air drift toward the dog, careful, deliberate, the way he had learned to handle things that could break too easily. The scent inside the truck shifted, mixing dust, leather, and something softer now, something alive. His hand hovered for a moment above the pup's side before resting lightly against it, feeling the fragile warmth beneath the fur, grounding himself in something real. "You are not done yet," he murmured, the words barely more than breath, spoken not with certainty, but with a quiet insistence that felt older than the moment itself. The road ahead stretched empty as he pulled back onto it, headlights cutting once more through the deepening blue of evening. The world outside reduced to motion and shadow, while inside the cab everything slowed, everything narrowed to the space between him and the small life he had picked up from the asphalt. But the tag remained there, just visible against the puppy's neck, catching his attention again and again like a question that refused to settle. Lucas Bennett. The name pressed against his thoughts, not as a memory fading in and out, but as something present, something that had stepped back into his life without warning, without explanation. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel slightly, his jaw setting as the past edged closer, uninvited but persistent, and he could almost hear a voice he had not heard in years, steady and calm, the kind of voice that used to cut through chaos and make everything feel manageable. He blinked once, pushing it back, focusing instead on the here and now, on the quiet rhythm of the engine, on the faint sound of the puppy's breathing. A mile passed, then another. Time moved differently in that silence, stretched, thin between what had been and what was unfolding now. The puppy shifted suddenly, a small movement, but enough to draw his full attention, and a faint sound followed. Not quite a whimper, not quite a sigh, something in between that carried more weight than it should have. Ethan glanced over, his hand already reaching out, and the moment his fingers brushed the pup's fur, the movement stilled, as if the contact alone had anchored it. He exhaled slowly, a breath he had not realized he was holding, and for a brief second, something unfamiliar passed through him. Not relief exactly, but a softening, a crack in the armor he had carried for too long. Then the puppy's eyes opened a little wider, just enough to focus, just enough to find him, and in that brief, quiet connection, something shifted. It was not recognition in any way that made sense, not something he could explain or even fully grasp, but it was there, steady and certain, like a thread pulled tight between past and present. Ethan held that gaze for a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable, his thoughts moving somewhere deeper than words. And then he looked back to the road, but the feeling did not leave. It stayed with him, quiet, persistent, like the echo of a voice carried on a wind he could not see, guiding him forward into something he had not planned, something he could no longer ignore. The truck rolled into the edge of a small town, just as the last light slipped beneath the horizon, street lamps flickering on one by one, casting soft amber pools across quiet sidewalks and empty storefronts. And Ethan slowed as the familiar sign of a 24-hour veterinary clinic came into view, its windows glowing steady against the deepening night like a place that refused to turn anything away. He pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching softly beneath him. And for a moment he sat there, hands still on the wheel, listening to the engine idle, to the faint, uneven breathing beside him, as if gathering something inside himself before moving again. Then he reached over, careful and deliberate, lifting the puppy into his arms, feeling the small weight settle against his chest, lighter than it should have been, but warmer now, just enough to remind him that time still mattered. The glass door chimed softly as he stepped inside, the scent of antiseptic and clean linen replacing the dust and asphalt of the road, and a young woman behind the counter looked up, her expression shifting immediately from routine to concern as she took in what he carried. "I found him on the road," Ethan said, his voice steady but low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something fragile. "He is still breathing." She nodded quickly, already moving, calling toward the back, and within seconds the veterinarian emerged, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp but kind, the kind of person who had seen too much to panic, but not enough to stop caring. "Set him here," she said, guiding Ethan to a metal table beneath a bright overhead light. And as he laid the puppy down, the sudden brightness revealed every small detail more clearly. The dust in its fur, the faint rise and fall of its chest, and the thin metal tag resting against its neck. Ethan's gaze flicked to it again, uninvited, unavoidable, and he saw the veterinarian pause for just a fraction of a second as her eyes followed his. "We will take care of him," she said gently, though her tone carried a question she did not voice. Ethan stepped back, but not far, his hands hovering at his sides, as if unsure where to go now that he had set the dog down, as if some part of him was still holding on. The room filled with quiet movement, soft instructions, careful hands, and the low hum of machines that measured things too small for the eye to see. And through it all, Ethan stood still, watching, his attention fixed not just on the puppy, but on the tag that had no place being there. Time stretched again, not in miles this time, but in seconds that felt heavier than they should have, until finally the veterinarian looked up at him, her expression easing just slightly. "He is weak, but he is holding on," she said. "That is more than enough for now." Ethan nodded once, slow, absorbing the words, but they did not settle the weight in his chest. His eyes dropped again, drawn back to the small piece of metal, and without thinking, he stepped closer, reaching out to adjust it so it would not press against the puppy's throat, and as his fingers brushed it, something inside him tightened, not pain, not fear, but recognition layered over something deeper, something unfinished. He swallowed quietly, then spoke, almost to himself. "That tag should not be here." The veterinarian glanced at him, then at the tag, but said nothing, sensing perhaps that the answer did not belong to her. And as Ethan stood there under the steady light, watching the slow, fragile rhythm of a life refusing to fade, He realized this was no longer just about saving a puppy on the side of the road. Something had followed him into that room, something that had waited long enough, and whatever it was not going to let him walk away this time. The room grew quieter as the initial urgency settled into a steady rhythm of care, the soft beeping of monitors blending with the low hum of overhead lights. And Ethan remained where he stood, close enough to see every small movement, every fragile sign that the puppy was still holding on, as if stepping away might somehow break that fragile thread. The veterinarian worked with calm precision, adjusting a line, checking the pup's breathing, her hands gentle but certain. And for a while, no one spoke because there are moments when words only get in the way of what matters. Ethan's eyes did not leave the table, but his thoughts were no longer in that room. Not entirely. They had drifted somewhere older, somewhere he had spent years trying not to revisit, and the name on that tag had opened a door he had kept closed for too long. Lucas Bennett was not just a name. It was a voice, a presence, a man who had once stood beside him in places where trust was not optional, where every step depended on the person next to you. And for a long time after that voice had gone silent, Ethan had carried the weight of it without ever speaking it out loud. He had learned to keep moving, to fill the quiet with routine, with distance, with anything that kept the past from catching up. But now it had, not in memory alone, but in something real, something resting against the neck of a small, struggling animal that had no reason to be connected to any of it. His hand moved again without thinking, reaching toward the edge of the table, stopping just short of, touching the puppy this time, as if he was not sure where the boundary was between what he could control and what he could not. "Where did you come from?" he said softly, not expecting an answer, not really asking the dog. But the question hung there anyway, suspended in the quiet air. The puppy's chest rose a little stronger now, the breath still shallow, but more certain, and its ears twitched faintly, reacting to something unseen, something beyond the room. Ethan noticed it immediately. Small details had always been his instinct, the kind that saved time, saved lives, and even now, outside of that world, it had not left him. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice low but focused. The veterinarian glanced up briefly. "Just a reflex," she said gently. "Is a good sign." But Ethan did not look convinced. He watched the puppy a moment longer, then slowly reached for the tag again, lifting it just enough to see the name once more, to confirm that it had not changed, that it was still as impossible as it had been minutes ago. The metal caught the light again, dull but steady, and something shifted in his expression. Not shock anymore, not confusion, but a quiet realization forming beneath the surface. He exhaled slowly, then set the tag back against the puppy's fur, more carefully this time, almost with respect. "Lucas," he said under his breath, the name leaving his mouth for the first time in years, and it did not echo the way he expected. It settled, heavy, but not sharp. The puppy stirred again, a little stronger this time, its head moving just slightly toward the sound, toward him, and Ethan felt it then, not as memory, not as coincidence, but as something deeper, something that did not need explanation to be real. He straightened slowly, his shoulders settling into a stillness that carried both weight and clarity, and for the first time since he stepped into that clinic, his gaze was not searching. It was steady. Whatever this was, whatever had placed that tag where it did not belong, whatever had brought that puppy into his path at that exact moment, it was not random. And Ethan Walker had spent too many years ignoring the things that did not make sense. Not this time. The night settled fully outside the clinic windows, pressing gently against the glass as if the world beyond had slowed to match the quiet inside. And Ethan remained standing beside the table, his presence no longer restless but anchored, as though something invisible had drawn a line from that moment back 3 years he had tried to leave behind. The puppy's breathing steadied further, still fragile, but no longer slipping. Each inhale a little deeper, each exhale less uncertain, and the veterinarian adjusted one final setting before stepping back slightly, giving space not just to the animal, but to whatever was unfolding around it. Ethan noticed everything. The slight twitch of the ears, the subtle tightening of the paws, the way the chest rose with a rhythm that felt intentional. Not random, not fading, present, alive. He leaned in just a little, his voice quieter now, almost instinctive. "You hear me, don't you?" It was not a question in the way most questions are asked. It was a recognition. The puppy's eyes flickered again, more focused this time, not fully open but no longer distant, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, its head shifted toward the sound of Ethan's voice. The movement was small, but it carried weight, the kind that does not belong to coincidence. The veterinarian noticed it too, her brow narrowing slightly, not in concern, but in quiet curiosity. "That is a strong response," she said, choosing her words carefully, as if not wanting to disturb whatever thread was forming. Ethan did not respond. His attention had narrowed again, but this time it was not pulled by the past. It was anchored in the present, in the connection forming in front of him, something subtle but undeniable. He reached out slowly, resting his hand gently against the puppy's side once more, and this time, the response was immediate. The small body leaned into his touch, not with strength, but with intention, as if recognizing something it trusted without needing to understand why. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly, and for a brief moment, the years between now and then felt thinner, less distant. The tag shifted again with the movement, catching the overhead light, and Ethan's eyes followed it, not with confusion anymore, but with a quiet acceptance that settled deeper than logic. He had spent years believing that some things ended clean, that once a chapter closed, it stayed that way. But standing there now, watching a life return breath by breath with a name from the past resting against it, he understood something he had not allowed himself to before. Some things do not end. They wait. They find their way back, not in the forms we expect, but in ways we cannot ignore. The puppy let out a faint sound then, soft and uneven, but stronger than before, and its eyes opened just enough to meet his again, fully this time, steady despite the weakness in its body. Ethan held that gaze, unmoving, and whatever words might have come to him stayed unspoken, because they were not needed. The connection did not ask for explanation. It simply existed. After a long moment, he straightened slightly, his hand still resting lightly against the pup, and spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You are not here by accident." The veterinarian glanced at him, then back at the puppy, but said nothing. Some things, she knew, did not belong to medicine, and as the quiet stretched around them, filled only by the steady rhythm of a life returning and the soft hum of the room, Ethan felt it clearly now, not as a memory, not as a question, but as something certain. Whatever had brought that puppy into his path was not finished with him yet, and for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to walk away. The hours moved quietly after that, not marked by clocks, but by small changes, subtle shifts that only someone watching closely would notice, and Ethan did not leave his place beside the table, not even when the veterinarian stepped away to tend to other patients, trusting that whatever needed to happen here did not require interruption. The clinic lights softened as the night deepened, casting a steady glow over the room, and the world outside faded into something distant, something unimportant compared to the fragile life resting inches from his hands. The puppy's breathing grew stronger with each passing minute, no longer uneven, no longer slipping between pauses, but finding a rhythm that held, a quiet persistence that felt almost deliberate, as if it had made a choice to stay. Ethan noticed the moment it changed. He always noticed moments like that, the kind that most people miss because they're too small, too quiet, too easily overlooked. The puppy's paw shifted. First, just slightly, the smallest movement, but it carried intention, not reflex, not random motion, and Ethan leaned forward without thinking, his hand already there before his mind caught up. "Easy," he murmured, his voice steady, low, the same tone he had used years ago when calm mattered more than anything else. The puppy responded again, its head lifting just a fraction this time, enough to break the line of stillness it had been held in, and its eyes opened wider, clearer now, focused. Not wandering, not lost. Focused. On him. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not sharp, not painful, but heavy like something long buried, shifting into place. He held the gaze, unmoving, and for a moment, the room seemed to fall away, the quiet stretching between them into something deeper than silence. Then the puppy made a sound, soft but distinct, not a cry, not a whimper, something closer to a breath shaped into meaning, and its body leaned again toward Ethan's hand, seeking contact, choosing it. He did not pull away. He let his hand rest there, steady, grounded, and the puppy settled into it as if it had always known where to find him. The tag moved again with emotion, brushing lightly against the table, and Ethan's eyes flicked to it, not with surprise this time, but with recognition that no longer felt like resistance. He reached for it once more, lifting it carefully, and, as the metal turned in the light, the name remained unchanged, unwavering, and something in him accepted it fully now, not as a question, but as a fact he did not need to explain to understand. "You always did find your way back," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. And for the first time, there was no hesitation in saying the name in his mind, no effort to push it away. The past did not feel like something chasing him anymore. It felt like something that had arrived. The puppy blinked slowly, its breathing steady, its body warmer now, stronger, and it held his gaze in a way that no animal should, not with that kind of awareness, not with that kind of calm certainty. Ethan let out a slow breath, one that carried years with it, and his shoulders lowered just slightly, the tension easing in a way he had not felt in a long time. He had spent so much of his life moving forward, always forward, never stopping long enough to look back, never allowing himself to sit with what had been left unfinished. But now, standing in that quiet room, with a small life returning under his hand and a name from the past resting against it, he understood something he had not before. Some bonds do not break when the moment ends. They wait. They return. And when they do not ask permission. They simply stand in front of you, breathing, waiting for you to recognize them. And Ethan Walker did. By the time the clinic clock crept past midnight, the world outside had gone completely still, the kind of silence that only comes when everything is settled in a rest. But inside that small room, something continued to move forward quietly, steadily, without asking permission. The puppy no longer lay as it had before. Its body had shifted closer to the edge of the table, not in weakness, but with purpose, as if drawn towards something it could feel more than see, and Ethan noticed it immediately, the way he noticed everything that did not quite fit into ordinary patterns. He leaned in slightly, his hand already there, and the moment his fingers brushed the fur along its side, the puppy responded again, stronger this time, its head lifting a little higher, its eyes fully open now, clear and steady in a way that did not match the hours before. The veterinarian stepped back into the room then, her footsteps soft against the tile, and she paused when she saw the change, her expression shifting from cautious observation to something closer to quiet surprise. "That is a remarkable recovery," she said, her voice low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might disrupt whatever unseen force was guiding the moment. Ethan did not answer right away. His attention remained fixed on the puppy, on the way it held his gaze, not searching, not confused, but certain, as if it had already found what it was looking for. The tag rested against its neck, still and unassuming now, but no less significant, no less impossible, and Ethan reached for it once more, not out of doubt, but out of instinct, lifting it just enough for the name to catch the light again. Lucas Bennett. The letters did not feel heavy anymore. They felt placed, intentional, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to be seen. He let the tag fall back gently, his hand lingering just a second longer than necessary, then returning to rest lightly against the puppy's side. "You brought this to me," he said quietly, the words forming without effort, not directed at the dog alone, but at whatever had connected them in the first place. The puppy shifted again, leaning into his hand with more strength now, its breathing steady, its presence undeniable, and for a moment, Ethan allowed himself to stop questioning it. Not everything needed an answer. Some things only needed to be recognized. The veterinarian moved closer, checking the pup once more, her hands careful, precise, but even she seemed to move differently now, as if aware that she was witnessing something that did not belong entirely to her field. "He is going to make it," she said after a moment, her voice certain this time. Ethan nodded once, slow, absorbing the words, but what settled in him was not relief alone. It was something deeper, a quiet understanding that this moment was not just about survival. It was about return, about something unfinished finding its way back into the light. The puppy blinked slowly, then did something small but unmistakable. It shifted its paw forward, placing it gently against Ethan's hand, not by accident, not by reflex, but with intention, and the contact held, steady and calm. Ethan looked down at it, his expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with the present moment alone, and for the first time in years, he did not feel the distance between what had been lost and what remained. He felt connection, not explained, not measured, just there, the kind that does not ask questions, the kind that simply stays. The first hint of morning came quietly, a pale line of light stretching across the horizon beyond the clinic windows, soft and unassuming, the kind of light that does not demand attention but gently reminds the world to begin again. And inside that small room, something had already begun long before the sun arrived. Ethan had not moved much through the night, not because he could not, but because there was nowhere else he needed to be, his place anchored beside the table where a fragile life had chosen to stay. And now, as the early light filtered in, he could see the difference clearly, not just in the puppy's breathing, which had settled into a steady, natural rhythm, but in its presence, in the quiet strength that had replaced the uncertainty from hours before. The veterinarian returned once more, her steps lighter now, her expression calm as she checked the small patient, her hands confirming what was already visible, and she offered Ethan a simple nod that carried more meaning than words. He understood. The moment had passed. Not ended, but changed. The puppy stirred again, fully this time, lifting its head with effort but without struggle, its eyes clear, focused, and when it looked at him, there was no distance left in that gaze, no searching, only recognition that felt complete. Ethan rested his hand against its side, and the puppy leaned into it without hesitation, its small body pressing closer as if the connection between them had never been broken, only paused. The tag shifted once more, catching the first true light of morning, and Ethan reached for it one last time. Not to question it, not to confirm anything, but simply to acknowledge it, his fingers brushing over the engraved name with a quiet steadiness that had replaced the uncertainty from the night before. Lucas Bennett. He did not say it out loud this time. He did not need to. Some names do not need to be spoken to be heard. He let the tag fall gently back into place, his hand lingering just a moment before returning to the puppy, and for the first time in years, the weight he had carried did not feel as heavy. Not gone, but shared. The puppy shifted again, then did something small, something simple but unmistakable. It nudged its head gently against his hand, a quiet gesture, instinctive and deliberate all at once. And Ethan let out a slow breath, one that seemed to carry more than the moment itself, something deeper, something that had been waiting longer than he realized. Outside, the light grew stronger, filling the room with a soft warmth that replaced the artificial glow of the night, and the world began to move again, distant sounds returning, life continuing as it always does, but inside that space, something had settled into stillness, into understanding. Ethan straightened slightly, his hand, still resting lightly against the puppy, and for a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in quiet acknowledgement of something he could not fully explain, something he did not need to. When he opened them again, the puppy was still there, breathing, present, real, and the connection remained steady and certain. Some stories do not end with answers. They end with something quieter, a presence, a return, a small life that refuses to let another one carry its weight alone. And sometimes that is enough. On a quiet American roadside at dusk, a U.S. Marine stops for what seems like a dying German Shepherd puppy, but what unfolds becomes one of those unforgettable animal stories where fate, memory, and loyalty quietly collide. As the Marine lifts the fragile pup and discovers a worn military dog tag that should not exist, the night turns into something deeper than a rescue. Something that echoes beyond reason and into the unseen bonds that connect souls. Inside a small-town veterinary clinic, as the puppy slowly fights to breathe again, the Marine is forced to confront a past he never fully let go of, with a name on that tag belonged to someone he once trusted with his life, making this one of those rare animal stories where healing is not only physical, but deeply emotional, through steady hands, quiet moments, and a connection that grows stronger with every breath the puppy takes. The story reveals how animal stories can carry meaning far beyond what the eyes can see, reminding us that sometimes the smallest life can return something we thought was lost forever. As the puppy begins to recover and responds to the Marine with an awareness that feels almost impossible to explain, the silence between them becomes filled with recognition, turning this into one of those powerful animal stories that blur the line between coincidence and something greater. In the early light of morning, when the world begins again, the Marine stands beside a life he helped save, but also beside a memory that found its way back to him through pause instead of words, showing that the most meaningful animal stories are not about answers, but about presence, connection, and the quiet miracles that arrive when they are needed most. Character 1. A 34-year-old white U.S. Marine, rugged face, short brown hair, light stubble, green-gray eyes, wearing worn tactical jacket and dog tags, front-facing portrait, cinematic lighting, realistic skin texture, serious expression, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2, a 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy, full body visible, sable black and tan coat, slightly thin but recovering, soft amber eyes, floppy ears not fully upright, standing gently, natural posture, cinematic lighting, realistic fur detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.